being available as an organization is what drives your revenue. If you're dead in the water, you can't do anything. So you want to have as much uptime as possible, 9 nines. You want to be available so your organization can deliver on its product and keep that revenue coming in so you have value being delivered by whatever it is that you're doing.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by vCISO, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hey there. Welcome to the Mindful Business Security Show. I'm your host, Accidental CISO. We're trying something new again today here. We have recorded live in the past, but we have never recorded live with a live audience. So this is going to be fun. No pressure. No pressure. It's great to see everybody here in the room. Thank you for coming and attending this unconference talk at Blue Team Con. For those listening on the podcast at a later date, we are recording this in Chicago at Blue Team Con. It is the biggest and best, in my opinion, cybersecurity conference for cyber defenders. So attendees come to this from all over the country to discuss basically protecting businesses from small organizations up to large enterprises. And so we've got a great group of folks here today. Thank you for being here and thank you for listening. If you don't already subscribe to the show, well, you should. You can find it in just about any one of your favorite podcast apps. Today, we're going to dive into compliance and audits in a small business environment. So if you've had customers asking for things like SOC 2, ISO 27001, High Trust, NIST CSF, SIG Lite, all these other things with lots of letters and numbers and things in them, this should be a good episode for you. We're going to take questions from callers right here in the audience based on the real world things that they're wrestling with in their organizations. My guest host today is another longtime industry veteran. He has recently launched his own cybersecurity consulting firm, helping folks with building their information security programs and protect their businesses as well. He specializes in information security governance and risk management and compliance work. He's a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which I think is probably very helpful when people don't comply with policies. Born and raised in New York City, but he is currently enjoying a break from the city life, and he's taken the opportunity to travel around the world. I believe he is leaving from Blue Team Con to head across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe for a while. I'm a little bit jealous of that, but he's getting to live the dream of kind of being a digital nomad and just explore the world while he helps his clients. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I am super excited to have you here. Diosvany Pallet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yay, Dio.
Dio, being nomadic and working from the road is something that I do a bit in my RV. Like I said, a little bit jealous. I spent 6 or 8 weeks this summer working from the RV and campsites and that sort of thing, but like completely picking up stakes. And just being like, you know what, we're going to go explore the world and prioritize that right now in life and have the luxury of having like a career that you can do that with and work from anywhere is pretty cool. What was the transition like for you to going from, more the traditional lifestyle of like living in one place and working a regular job and all that kind of stuff and, going into an office to, you know what, I'm going to be self-employed and I'm going to do consulting and I'm going to go see what there is to see in the world?
So it was actually way more seamless than I expected. Things kind of just fell in place, luckily enough. So I moved to Maryland in 2018, and that was for a gig with a DoD contractor. That was like, I guess, my first official cyber role. And that was regular, in office, obviously dealing with government stuff, so you had to be present. I left that company in 2021, got a remote job, And I only moved to Maryland for that job. So after that, I had no reason to be there. I knew I didn't want to go back to New York. I actually didn't want to go back to New York after college. Like, my theory on New York City is it's a good place to visit, not necessarily the best place for living. So my girlfriend now, we had like just started dating at the time. She really wanted to travel, and I had the idea of traveling around the states specifically to see what state I would want to live in. We hit 2 states, Pennsylvania and Texas. And then we went to Aruba, and we've been out of the country ever since, pretty much. So it just kind of fell together. The transition was super easy. I'm kind of a prepaholic, so it was easy for me to make sure I had everything I needed wherever we went. So, like, I just thought about everything I need to work, and luckily for me, I'm a knowledge worker, so I don't need much. Just a desk, an internet connection. Obviously, at the time when I had my home office, I had 3 monitors, so giving that up was tough. It's still something I struggle with, but I was able to get like a little portable, screen or whatever, and that's worked well enough. And then I have an international hotspot on my phone, so it's like a backup for anything. And we stay in Airbnbs, so before we go anywhere, I always message the host and ask them about their internet connectivity. That's like how I go about that and making sure I'm covered.
Yeah.
But
man.
It's been fun. I've been enjoying it, and I don't know when I'm going to stop.
Right. Yeah. If you're having fun and it's working, why
Yeah.
stop? Man, what a fantastic way to live and explore and work and that sort of thing. So I imagine, being a prepaholic is a quality that you would want in your risk management professional.
We also typically stay in main cities for that reason. So, like, we don't go out to like the outskirts of certain places. What we'll do is we'll stay in like the main city, because obviously the infrastructure there is typically the best. And then if we want to go somewhere that's like off the beaten path, we'll just take like a weekend trip or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not jealous at all. No. Man, fantastic. So information security is a really broad field with a lot of different opportunities to specialize in different areas. And a lot of folks, when they look into security, they look at the technical side of it, the forensics, the incident response, the active defense stuff, those types of things, and not quite as many people, gravitate to the risk management, the governance, compliance kind of stuff, like what we do. What was it that kind of pulled you in that direction? Like, how'd your career path converge on this, and what drew you to it to say, yeah, this is what I want to do?
I got tricked.
Oh no!
So the first role that I got in the security space was the title was security engineer, which sounds technical, So I was really excited. I thought I was going to be doing technical stuff, and I was not. That was for the DoD contractor. I was really making sure that the systems that they supplied the government with, or they were maintaining for the government, they had the ATOs for, kept those ATOs. So I expected to do something more technical, and I wanted to, but my career just went in a different direction. And after spending 3.5 years doing compliance work, building out system security plans, making sure all the documentation was in place, doing on the quarterly basis, doing the scans, making sure all the checks and stuff, the FISMA audits, which I don't miss at all. I just stuck with it because, I recognized the value in it after I started doing it, in terms of like, oh, this is also important. Like, you need to have a program in place. It's not just about, oh, let's just turn on a firewall and forget about it, right? Somebody has to review the alerts, make sure that, you're doing a risk assessment on a regular basis, those type of things. And also, it's just like, from a, cost benefit perspective, it doesn't make sense if this is where I have deep expertise to now pivot to something completely different, like pen testing, which is actually what I wanted to do as a career, because it's like, I've already put so much time into this, it would just detract and be more difficult for me to, so I just pen test as a hobby now. And I think it's actually better that way because I can just do it at my leisure. I'll just load up a virtual environment or whatever, like try Acme or Hack the Box or whatever, just load something up and just have fun. It's just a game, as opposed to a lot of people have that thing where it's like something that's a hobby. When it turns into work, like the joy is kind of stolen from you because it's like now you have to do it whether you don't want to in a moment or anything like that. So, I just keep that as a hobby on the side, and I just focus on the GRC stuff for work. And I guess the beauty of the GRC side as opposed to the more technical things is a lot more interconnectivity with people, right? So I've met so many people just having conversations about their organizations and stuff like that, and being exposed to different, ways of the organization operating. Obviously, small, medium-sized businesses, so there's some things that repeat, and I think we'll get into that later as far as challenges. But it's always different in some way, and that's a lot of fun.
I know I enjoy it. A lot of people think this, the policy stuff, the governance, the compliance stuff is, kind of a boring area. But like you said, like you can do those technical things, but you got to tie them together somehow into a program to really get the full benefit out of them. And that's, the piece that I know I enjoy. It sounds like you enjoy that too. When we talk about compliance with folks, it's not uncommon to have like their eyes glaze over, and it's tough to reach them because they do think this is really boring stuff. When you're working with small businesses, especially, like, do you find you have to fight like kind of a stigma around the word compliance, that when you start talking about that, like people start to be like, it just means we got to do a bunch of stuff and it's not business value add, or like, is there a stigma that you've found you have to?
I would say yes and no. The yes is companies don't want to do anything they don't have to in terms of investing, right? And we know that they look at our side of things, like investment in cyber defenses in general, as a cost center, not a revenue driver. The paradigm shift that's happening now is obviously it's being enforced on more organizations. Like, hey, you have to either, your customers are saying we want to see a SOC 2 report, or your customers are saying we want to see an ISO report, or depending on what industry you're in, your industry is saying, hey, you have to do this on an annual basis. Obviously, we've seen that happen with the finance industry a long time ago, and it's now starting to be a thing that's more common in our space, which I think is a benefit for all, because at the end of the day, we as consumers, just everyday citizens, all these companies have our data, So investing in security as a company not only benefits you, but it also just benefits us, like just everyday people. The no part is, I think, from a sales enablement perspective, organizations are starting to realize that having something that shows that I have a baseline security program, or just that I'm operating in some form of a good way. And the reason why I say some form is I've seen, people or organizations get SOC 2 certified and ISO certified, and there's still room for improvement. It doesn't necessarily mean you're doing everything, but it establishes a baseline, right, for a good security program, right? And you have to, obviously, to maintain these things, you have to do it on a recurring basis. But from a sales enablement perspective, that pressure of customers now saying, hey, we want to see a SOC 2 report before we sign on, it's making the organizations realize, it's not just about creating value through sales or whatever. We also have to protect the value, which is what we do. And I think that is a big thing that people are like now, or organizations are now starting to recognize. It's like, yeah, it's a cost center because you have to invest. But ultimately, the benefit to you as an organization is the value that you create, you now are also protecting, and you can retain that by investing in your security program, as opposed to, as soon as anything happens, like, it's a reputation hit, your customers are looking at you, we don't want to work with you guys anymore, we're going to look for an alternative. So you're going to lose a lot of that value you created. And we've seen organizations obviously plenty go bankrupt over things that really could have just been avoided. As far as, I mean, you guys just spoke about security awareness training, and it's like, if you would have just invested in building out a good security awareness training program and training your users on, hey, don't click every link that comes into your inbox. Like, just simple things about recognizing a phishing email. You know, those very minor things. And it's like, I should invest in these things to protect the value that we have created as a business. And also, it's like, obviously, availability of services to your internal end users and also your external end users. So that's another thing of, value.
Yeah, great way to frame that of, not just doing those things to make the sale, but continue to protect the value on an ongoing basis is really, really a good way to look at that. When you're working with small businesses, the size of the organization can introduce really unique challenges, especially with some of the tenets of what we're doing with compliance, risk management, those types of things. Can you talk a little bit about like some of the challenges that you see in small businesses, just kind of related to the fact that they are very small, like, maybe your approach to how you help them navigate some of those things?
So it's kind of two-pronged. The main issue I see with businesses, I guess ignoring the size in general, is governance, right? So from a governance perspective, again, that program, making sure things are done in a repeatable manner, making sure we're actually doing them. We don't set a policy and forget it. Like, somebody has to review this policy, make sure you're actually complying with it internally, because that's another thing. It's like, it's not just about external compliance with SOC 2, ISO. You have to be compliant with your own policies. In a lot of ways, SOC 2 is really, are you complying with your own policies? Because as long as whatever controls you set meet the criteria, they're just going to say, okay, well, this is the, it's like a mapping. This is the SOC 2 outcome that we want to see. This is what control you say you have in place. Now we're going to check to see if that control is actually in place. So governance is a very common problem, just generally, but for small businesses, the differentiator there is one, budget, and also team size. So it's a lot easier if you have like unlimited budget, obviously, to just buy unlimited tools, but even that's not going to solve the problem. You still have to have people that are maintaining, managing, doing the practices on a regular basis. And that's where smaller organizations struggle. It's like having the manpower to actually maintain these things. Like, okay, we have it, like we've done it once. Now, how do we make sure? And in that case, you get creative, like, for example, I'm not going to ask an organization that has a VP of engineering running their entire cyber program to file a change ticket that's extremely detailed, approve of it himself. But I'm going to request that any change that you make to the infrastructure, you should have a ticket at minimum that details what changes you made. You don't have to go through the process of emailing yourself for approval. We can make that implicit by policy because you're the person with the keys, you're the admin. And what you can do is on a quarterly basis, send an email to whoever's above you, whether that's the CEO or if there's a director of whatever, and have them review those changes and, just document it. A lot of it is obviously documentation and making sure we're aware of what's going on in the organization. So I think, like I said, the main challenge for them is like team size and trying to figure out how do we do all these? Because when you just look at, SOC criteria or ISO criteria, it's vague. Like, a lot of people don't know what this means, right? So, for example, a very simple one is ISO requires you to do screening. Like, that's exactly what it says, screening on all potential candidates. But that could mean a number of things. It's like, well, we don't have the budget to do background checks. Well, if you dive deeper into the actual requirements of the standard, it's not a shall statement when it says like, so obviously a shall statement is something you have to do. A should statement is something you should do. It's kind of a suggestion.
Good point. Good differentiation.
So when you look at the standard, there's a should statement that says your background screening should include the following, but it's not a shall statement. So I can argue for you on your behalf with an auditor and say, hey, this is a should statement, not a shall statement. This is how they do background screening. Whether it's we just take the resume, we do interviews, we do these simple things, and this is by policy, and the auditor can't argue with you because it's a should statement, not a shall. But most organizations, they would just see the screening and they're like, we don't have the money to run checker or whatever on every person that we're possibly going to extend an offer to, because that is just going to be an exorbitant cost. So you'd have to get creative in certain things like that. And also just having a good understanding of obviously the frameworks and what they're actually requiring of you helps with coming up with those creative solutions. But also like having something in place that skirts around and is creative, but like it still takes care of the requirement.
And that creativity that you mentioned there is required, I think, is probably one of the things I enjoy most about working with small businesses is that ability to look at what are we really trying to accomplish, like getting to the why of what's the requirement, what's it trying to address, how can we do it in a way that's right in this organization with their budget and their people.
It's always contextual.
And yeah, none of this exists outside the context of the specific business. So I love that point that you made there. As you're working with, your clients and other organizations that you have been familiar with, any mistakes, especially in small businesses, any mistakes you see these smaller orgs kind of making consistently?
Yeah, governance. So it's funny because a lot of the organizations, so I'll use one recent company as an example. They came to me for a SOC 2 readiness engagement. Well, initially it was a SOC 2 assessment, and I did the assessment for them, and they, after I delivered the report or whatever, they were like, can you actually help us like do all these things? And I was like, sure. So I had to gauge like their familiarity with SOC 2. They said, this was actually really funny to me. They said, we are as familiar with SOC 2 as much as we can spell it. And then they spelled it wrong. They spelled it like socks on your feet. So I spent 2 weeks just training the two guys. I spent 2 weeks training them on sort of what the criteria was, getting familiar with the verbiage, the language, understanding it. Here's the resources. Here's this stuff. Now, this is what we're going to do. And going back to the governance piece, what I found was they actually had about 85% of the technical stuff covered, right? The 15% that they were missing in terms of getting to that point where they can, an auditor come in and we're compliant right now, was the program portion. Building out repeatable practices, getting to that 3, in maturity level. Because it was like, well, we turned on the firewall. We have it set to default deny all. But does anybody review any alerts? We have alerting on. Is it just on? And it was those type of things. Well, we have a SIEM solution. Is anybody looking at it? No, but it's on. Okay, we have alerts on for this, but is anybody looking at it? No.
We're so close.
Like, why aren't you looking at these things? And it's like, well, we have them on, so we think that's good enough. And obviously, if the VP of engineering is the person that's running everything and he's just thinking about the engineering portion, it's like, no, you're also responsible for security in your organization formally because you don't have a CISO, you don't have a CTO necessarily. These are things you have to consider as well. And I understand you come from an engineering background, so everything to you is product, right? Product. But then there's the governance portion that you are tasked with. Like if you're a small team, obviously a lot of people wear multiple hats, and for them it was a two-man shop. So they actually had a decent separation in terms of how they ran things, and that was really that's a common thing. Is like we'll have all the things as far as like the technical tools and capabilities in place, but we don't have the processes in place to actually support and validate that these things are actually operating the way we want them to and the way we think they are. Because if you don't validate, you can say it's operating until you're blue in the face. But if I go check and you're like, wait, this actually isn't pulling any telemetry from one of these main systems at all. We have no visibility here. So now what's been going on in that system since the last time you checked it, which was never? That's the kind of issue that I typically run into, is just like putting in place a program, processes, validating things, and just double checking, going back and like the risk assessment. Obviously, you have to do a risk assessment on an annual basis at minimum for most of these things. But it's like, why do it once? If you're putting a new feature for your application, like let's say you've never developed an API, but now you're developing an API for your main application. Okay, let's go back to the risk assessment. And now that we have this API, how is it configured? What does it, what additional risks are we exposing our organization to through this API? And just document it. And then maybe if you need to, through the course of the development cycle, just modify it. And then you have this ongoing risk assessment that you don't have to worry about coming back to once a year. Because if you're doing it periodically in tangent with whatever your efforts are on the product side, it's always updated. You're always looking at it. You always have something to refer to that's like, oh, this is where we were, this is what we're doing, this is the controls in place. How do we knock this down to a level of risk that's acceptable? Are we going to risk accept this? That type of thing. So governance is a big portion.
Yeah, it's and I think a lot of folks in small businesses, they justify it, but well, we're small, everybody just has to help out.
Mm-hmm.
We have to wear a lot of hats, we do all this stuff, so you end up with people being helpful. It's coming from a good place of
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to do what to do to make the business successful, but it's not really done in an organized way, a governed way,
Mm-hmm.
as you're saying. It's and I see very similar things from my side. If you had a magic wand that you could just wave this magic wand in the air and just help every small business owner understand one thing about information security, like what would that one thing be for you?
Governance. Because
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, if we take incident response, for example, a lot of organizations understand, or, it's continuity of operations, whatever business, disaster recovery. Okay, we want to have backups. So if anything goes wrong, we can, stand back up from backups. Okay, you have backups. Okay, what else? Do you have a forensics partner to actually do the investigation? No, we have lead downstairs. Is lead trained on any of these things? Why don't you just reach out to your cyber insurance provider and see if that's something you can have built in, right? As far as like having a forensics partner built into your cyber insurance, that's also a common thing. But in terms of incident response, for example, we'll turn on backups, we'll turn on all these tools, but then on no basis do you ever go and validate, just do a recovery test to see, can we actually recover from these backups? Because now when there's a fire and something happens, first of all, you don't have an SOP in place, like a step through for anyone to take and say, this is how we recover from this specific backup for this specific system. If it's, obviously I wouldn't say to do this for somebody's laptop, but like systems in production that are critical, you should have step-by-step guidance on, hey, go here, click this, this is how you stand back up. But also, if you're not going through and on a regular basis confirming that the backups that you're taking are actually usable, then you don't have anything. And this entire time you thought you had something, and then when it hits the fan and you never check, you don't have anything because you didn't validate. You don't even have a process for recovery. It's just we just turned on backups in AWS. Do you even know how to get from So if there was a magic wand, I would say understanding why governance matters, because I think a lot of organizations just look at the technical aspect specifically and they'll say, okay, we'll just turn on all the light switches, but then there's nobody in the room. So all the lights are on, everything's blinking, but no one's validating that they're actually performing and operating in the manner that they expect them to. So yeah, it's a common theme, but.
Great thoughts on that. So the next segment of the show, we're going to go to the phones. I know we don't actually have phones here, but we're going to pretend anyway that we have callers on the line to ask questions, and we'll we'll see if we can help them with some of the stuff they're wrestling. You ready to go to the phones?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
Our first caller on the line today is Aaron from Madison. Hey, Aaron, how's it going?
Hi, great to be here. I wanted to ask about the tone at the top, because that's prevalent in a couple of the SOC criteria. And when you're with a startup or a really small business, there's not necessarily that focus initially. And trying to go back to the basics with leadership to say, here's why this is important, and here's what you need to put out yourself in order to mark this compliant. What are some suggestions for how they can do that by driving at the top, and why is that important to them?
Well, as I said earlier, part of the benefit that we have now in the industry is that a lot of organizations are being pressured into doing things, right? So by the time, in a lot of instances, by the time I get called and it's like, hey, we need to do the SOC 2, everyone in the organization understands you need to do this, or you're going to lose this valuable client. So that's been something that has been of a benefit to myself. And I'm sure others in the industry have also benefited from, in terms of like not having to argue too much. But as far as like concrete, minute things, for example, like, hey, we should invest in this. For example, one of my clients, they had a security and awareness training program. They just had this one video that they kept recycling on an annual basis. And I'm like, we should not be doing that. Like, let's get something better that you don't have to worry about sending your staff every 3 years to record this video and update, because it's not being updated anyway. There's new risks, new threats that are coming out, on a regular basis. And it's actually harder for you to maintain in terms of like adequately training your employees with this, doing it in-house, instead of paying $300 like a year, 1,200 a year, depending on how many users you have. And you just have a training catalog, you click and send it out, right? So I think in terms of specific things, it's just about, in a lot of ways, breaking down the cost-benefit analysis of things. Like, you're doing it in this manner that, one, is making it more difficult for you to maintain, and ultimately, it might not look costlier right now because you haven't gotten attacked or that you know of. But in a lot of ways, you can find tools, whether it's an open source tool or obviously something you have to subscribe to or pay for, that are cost effective and also less burdensome than something that's completely immature. So I think, one, being capable of doing the research on a tool that fits whatever their budget is and also whatever problem they're having, and breaking it down to them like, hey, this is why I suggest we move towards this process, and ultimately showing them like, this will make it, one, easier for you guys in the long run, and it's also more affordable than what you're doing because you're wasting cycles doing this, and also you're not really getting any benefit from it, even though you think you are, because you're just checking a box of, we sent the video out, so cool. But I'm pretty sure if I send out a phishing simulation to your users, they're going to do horribly, which actually did happen in this case. So I got them on board to buy, the tool that I had suggested. And one of the first things I did to show them, I'm just going to show you. We're not going to send out any trainings. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to send out a newsletter so they're familiar. They understand this is a tool. Whenever they see that domain, they know, whatever, okay, this is our new thing. Obviously, the phishing simulation changed the domain and stuff like that. But when they got it, they did horribly. And that was a very eye-opening moment. And the VP of, I don't know if he was CEO, yeah, the COO, sorry. He was like, hey, he still tried to like argue back a little bit. He was like, hey, I don't fully see the benefit of this. Like, why are we doing this instead of what we were doing? And I was like, well, we just got the results from the phishing simulation, and I presented them to him. on a meeting, and he was like, "Oh, okay, that's bad, but these must have been like advanced emails that super." And I was like, "Oh, no problem." I showed him one of the emails, and it was a fake DHL, like the shipping company. It was a fake, hey, your package, like it was horrible. It was like not advanced at all, and somebody clicked on it, and there was like, it was me, the CTO, the COO, and the CEO. They all started laughing, and the COO was like, "Okay, I get it now. I'm sorry." Like he just stopped asking questions. So to go back to your question, I think the way you do it is just taking the time and understanding from their perspective. It's like, why am I paying this? What am I getting out of this? Like obviously for them, it's a cost. So breaking it down to them in very plain language that they can understand and explaining the benefit of whatever you're suggesting is typically the best way of getting buy-in. And you do that 1 or 2 times, and they don't even question anything anymore. At that point, you've gained their trust, and you can propose that they send a rocket to the moon. They'll be like, "How much is it?" And that's it. And as long as they have the budget for it, they'll just give you sign-off, because now you've positioned yourself as a trusted advisor. So once they have your trust, they're not going to double check you on anything. As long as it's not crazy from a budget perspective and you're actually like taking the time to find solutions that work for them and you're cost conscious. Because the way I work with my clients is I act like their pockets are my pockets. If there's something that I'm suggesting to them, if I know I wouldn't be comfortable at their level paying for it, I'm going to look for something else. I'm not just going to find, the most popular tool, the latest cutting edge AI. No, because one, that's going to have way more bells and whistles than you need. I know exactly what you need, and we're going to find that right-sized solution for you. And when we get there, I'm going to take the time to explain to you why this is the one. So,
yeah, that business driver, that Dio is talking about, like that's 100% the right way to look at it. Is what is it that they care about? For us, we're lucky if we have a business driver such as the customer saying, "We aren't going to buy your product if you don't have a SOC 2 report to give us." Or maybe if you're dealing with, another country, some other, thing like ISO 27001 or something. Or maybe you don't have a government mandate now for privacy if you happen to live in New York or California or something. Some businesses will respond to increasing insurance costs as the insurance companies are sending more difficult and uncomfortable questionnaires. And they're realizing like they're having trouble answering the questions on the questionnaires, and they don't have good answers for these things. Sometimes they have an event and get hacked, and maybe that, that bad thing that happened is the push. But absent of those 4 things, we as consultants don't typically come into the picture, but for somebody who's inside an organization and who wants to continue to drive security and has the opportunity to do it from inside, and maybe this is something that's a little bit, extra in the role, maybe somebody's running IT or something already. I just think, focusing on operational excellence is another area, because that's security kind of becomes a byproduct of operational excellence. Like security issues come when people make mistakes, when processes break down, when you don't have the right tooling in place, when there's inefficiencies and people try to work around the process because of it. So if you don't have any other business driver, and many small mom and pop shops don't necessarily, but if you're worried about security and having trouble convincing them, maybe don't lead with security, and lead with how can we make things more efficient, and how do we keep from having rework on things? How do we keep people from making mistakes, and approach it from that way? And the security enhancements ends up being like, oh yeah, and this makes us better security, but we're more efficient, and we're not wasting money on doing things more than once because they didn't get done right in the first place. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate your question. All right, our next caller on the line today is Amanda from Illinois. Hey, Amanda, thanks for coming. How can we help today?
I love the topic, and I actually had a burning question. It's more like for both of you being more in that space. working with clients, do you think that there's a really good use case and a sell for like a small business or startup, kind of helping them actually weave security into like their business continuity plan? Like, so, because even starting a business, they should have like some kind of business continuity goals that they want to meet. How would either of you go about like trying to make that a use case to really integrate security in the overall business continuity for them? Just to kind of keep it separate. I'm curious what you both think.
So it depends on, I guess, how the business operates. But let's assume that technology is a factor in the way they operate. Whether it's a innovator driver, like they sell like an application or something like that, or they just have in-house IT that they rely on to do things, generally speaking. Like let's say it's a marketing firm, right? Let's say they don't have an application, they just have laptops, and that's the most important thing to them. Well, now you have to make sure that the workstations are available to your users. That's the most important thing in your use case, right? Because you don't have, let's say they don't have an application, they don't have any servers that are collecting data, like everything's in O365, whether it's, collecting, reports in SharePoint and something like that. In that sense, from an IT perspective or just from a security perspective, okay, well, we still need to analyze what are the highest risks that can affect us. In this case, obviously, we're relying on Microsoft 365 for a lot of our services, right? Let's look at their SOC report. It's as simple as that. Validate that what you think is in place, what you're relying on, is exactly what you expect to be in place. And then also making sure that your IT team has the capability to make sure that the technology that your internal users need is available to them. So in this instance, it's like you should have a surplus of laptops, just make sure, obviously within a specific margin. That way, if, this person's device goes down, we have a process for ship it back. We'll send you this one. We'll inspect it, make sure it's usable, put it in the backlog, change the asset management system to update where it's at, and then it's done. So you lose this person's productivity for 4 weeks while you inspect the laptop and Apple ships out a new one. It's just switch it out real quick. We're going to send you a box, send it to us. So that's part of the security portion is also availability. People forget about that. It's not just confidentiality and integrity. It's also availability. So if you don't rely heavily, let's say, on having servers, server space, and stuff like that, and you just have technology as a supporter of your organization, it's still important for it to be available. So that I would say that's why it's important to have it built in, like from the beginning, is that availability portion. And making sure you have processes in place where if something does go wrong, whether it's a minor incident or a major one, and something isn't available, some component of your organization's technology is not available that is necessary for you guys to, one, continue operating and delivering on value, right? Going back to the value portion, you have a process in place for making sure you get that value back as soon as possible. So
yeah, and you may be able to use the disaster recovery plan, because there's sort of a business impact analysis that you have to do as you build that to figure out what are the types of things we would potentially need to recover from and what could they affect within our business. But as you look through these are the questions you ask in a more traditional risk assessment. And so something like starting this is a way to sort of take baby steps, especially in very small organizations that have never done this before, to kind of get them used to thinking through and doing some risk assessment. You're not necessarily doing every potential risk that could potentially befall the entire organization. You're keeping it structured to just potential things that could impact and make it difficult or impossible for us to operate. And what do we do to make sure that we can get back to generating revenue again? And whether it's a retail store or a SaaS startup or any other kind of service business or physical business, you know, generating revenue is critical. If you don't have revenue, you got no cash flow, like, you know, the dominoes fall pretty quick. Usually I start with frameworks, you know, established standards that are more general instead of starting with a bespoke risk assessment. But if you've got an organization that doesn't have a compliance mandate for a particular framework or something like that, they're not going to be audited against some framework. Starting with the disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan, and you can kind of put those into one even. You don't have to create separate plans necessarily. And just step through with leadership, thinking about, you know, what bad things may happen and what do we do with it is a great stepping off place, actually, to start getting them to think about risk a little bit differently and mitigation and understanding that nothing's 100%. Like there's no silver bullet here. Like these things may not totally work perfectly, but you know, how do we do that? And it also gets it. You can also start introducing them to some governance because you're going to have communications protocols in there. When something happens, who's going to make the decision that we do this? How are you going to communicate to the rest of the business what's happening, what they should do, what their alternative work things are? So I've never really thought about it until this moment as you've asked this question quite this way. But this is a great way to introduce into a small business that doesn't have any other strong compliance driver to get a toehold into building a security program.
Yeah, I only asked that not for me personally, but I actually have family members that have physical businesses, and it's very challenging for them to understand the use case that they need to have these frameworks, they need to have these securities in place digitally. Not just your security system that's at the actual shop. You need to actually have it inside and out. I mean, it's just like the way I've always looked at it is threats exist on both sides of the firewall, and it's the same way between physical security and digital security. Threats are going to exist on both sides of that fence. And so, yeah, that was helpful because I'm definitely sending this to a couple of people.
One thing I wanted to add is you were talking about retail shops, so you mentioned retail shops, and there's actually a very simple and kind of funny example of what do you do if your POS system goes down?
Yeah.
And you don't have enough cash on hand to now just switch operations to cash. So just a very simple thing like that of making sure, okay, well, we accept credit cards, debit cards, but what do we do if the POS system goes down? Okay, well, we have to switch to cash, but we only keep $50 in the till at any time. Okay, so now we know we need to change this process. So if it does go down, we have enough cash on hand where if we have the same customer base, we can give change. It's a very simple thing that's applicable to almost anything you can think of. And most people probably wouldn't think that's security, but again, that availability piece, because that's what being available as an organization is what drives your revenue. If you're dead in the water, you can't do anything. So you want to have as much uptime as possible, 9 nines. You want to be available so your organization can deliver on its product and keep that revenue coming in so you have value being delivered by whatever it is that you're doing.
Definitely sending this to a couple of members of my family. I love you.
Fantastic question. Thank you. I know we've only got a few minutes left. Anybody have a question about like audits?
Yeah, so I'm Phil from Indiana, first-time live audience goer, first-time caller. I had a question about friction, kind of with governance, and that leads into audits, right? Because audits require evidence. And sometimes I've seen audits in different areas get really persnickety. Did you provide evidence that you provided evidence? It starts becoming the work about the work versus the actual work going on. I'll give you, for instance, I saw an auditor ask once, give us the register, of incidents you had this year or something, declared incidents or confirmed incidents. It's like, well, what if we had none? All right, prove it. What? Like I have to prove a negative like that. What am I doing? So I had to completely do work and create something just to make an auditor happy. that there was no work. So there's little friction points like that with audit and governance, and there's like creating more work versus actually doing what. So have you encountered those types of situations, and have you helped people with those, or what are some other friction points you've seen?
I've encountered that exact same scenario that you just pointed to. And the way I resolved it is literally, you already have to do a quarterly security review, quarterly governance call with your executive management committee or whatever. Discuss it. If there's no security incidents, just put it on the agenda that we're going to discuss any security incidents in the past quarter. And if there are none, that's going to be in the meeting minutes that we actually validated, had a discussion, there were none, and that was enough. So it can get contentious to your point where like an auditor is just like asking you for evidence of something that does not exist, where it's like, we had no security incidents. How am I supposed to prove that to you? In that instance, like I said, we just submitted the quarterly review because I was just like, we don't have anything aside from the fact that we discussed it as part of our review. But again, that goes back to the governance piece, because if there was an incident, yeah, you might have a change ticket and all this other stuff and something filed in JIRA, but you should also just on an ongoing basis discuss, hey, what have we done in the past quarter? What's our performance? What's going on? And if there were no security incidents, document that as well. And in your quarterly meeting, the meeting minutes just...
I mean, that would probably be a key metric you'd want to let people track, right?
Yeah,
hey,
I mean,
we had zero today.
That's another way you could do it. If you have a metrics document, include in there any security incidents. Like, your goal is to have 0, put it in there as a goal, and whenever you do your metrics review, you see how you performed. If it's in there, you have 0, the auditors can't say anything. And also, unfortunately, sometimes you just have to be willing to not back down from auditors. Because I think it's a failure and kind of a symbol or a show of how immature our industry is, that most times auditors actually don't even know what they're asking for. So you, as the expert, most of the times you can actually get an auditor to fold if you just like beat them over the head with like, hey, I know why you're asking this, but this is why it doesn't make sense. And I've had times where I had to argue with an auditor like that, and I'm like, can you just get your senior? Like, just let me talk to your senior and I'll explain to them why you're wrong. And I've had no issues with that because that's what I'm brought in to do. If I'm helping a small business, they don't have the information or the understanding of these frameworks to argue for themselves. I'm going to argue for you. And if the auditor that I'm speaking to doesn't understand why they're wrong, just get me your senior. Whoever trained you, I'll just speak to them. And that's happened in the past. And I spoke to the senior guy, and he's like, yeah, he told the junior, like, no, he's actually right, and this is why. So we're not going to mark that as an exception because it's not an exception. So unfortunately, there are those moments, but you also just have to be cognizant that a lot of times the auditors don't even know what they're asking for.
And they expect that pushback. I mean, I've experienced the exact similar things, and you talk to somebody who's running point on the engagement or whatever from the auditor side, and it's not uncommon. It's not going to offend them to push back. Something else I've done, especially in very small orgs, that they don't have a trail from a ticketing system like Jira or a help desk ticketing system or something to log the work. It's very easy to mark a ticket to log the work of, we did the review. Each quarter, it's time-stamped, there's a comment in there. You can provide those tickets to show we did the review, and there's a comment that says there were nothing to review. I have had in very small orgs just draft up sort of a memo for the CEO or whichever one of the executives is going to be accountable for it, to sign that attests that there was nothing, there were no incidents during the period that the audit is looking for. And it's signed, it's got their name. And that has worked for me with both SOC 2 and high trust audits, to have a signed attestation that there weren't any incidents during the period.
One of my clients does emails. They'll just send emails to each other.
Email, time-stamped.
Yeah, no, emails have been helpful in times past, so that does help. And kind of to your point you were going on was, the more the friction, but more the overhead in documenting, right? So, now we have to have Jira, or we have to have some special system to do this, to document. And so it's like trying to keep that friction point and cost low to be able to maintain that audit readiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you for coming in. So Dio, we're running out of time here for folks listening on the podcast later. Our time slot here is up in the unconference thing. So real quick, Dio, where can folks find you online if they want to follow up or reach out to you, ask you about, potentially helping them doing some work, or, just ask questions or to connect?
Yeah, so through this conference, I found out that I need to have a Twitter presence, apparently. But as of now, I'm only on LinkedIn. You could just find me at, my full name, Diosvany Pallet, Diosvany, last name Pallet. And then my email is my first name, first initial of my last name, at gmail.com, or Cubell Consulting. Cube, ELLE Consulting.
Perfect. And we'll put links to those in the show description so that folks listening can find a link to your LinkedIn and Cubell Consulting. So I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today. This has been fantastic. We've had great questions from the audience, and your insights on this have also been wonderful. I think our listeners are going to find this very, very valuable. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being here and listening. And thank you for listening on the podcast at whatever point in the future you are listening today. So until next time, I am Accidental CISO, and stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.